So hi everybody, I'm Allie, as she mentioned, Vice President of Brand Partnerships for MediaLab, and if you're unfamiliar with that, we have brands under our portfolio like Genius, Imager, WorldStar, and I'm joined by a very special guest, which, like, let's be real, they're here to hear from you. So Lori, do you mind just introducing yourself?
Sure, I'm Lori Cerwin. I call myself the Creative Director, Senior Director of Brand Experience at Conagra. And we have over 90 brands. None of them are as sexy as some of the brands that were here at Miller Coors.
That's not true. That's not true.
We've talked a lot about like the glossy, cool brands. I have a lot of brands, but they're all wonderful in their own ways.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And also just a thank you to Brand Innovators for hosting this and Molson Coors for the hospitality. So we're thrilled to talk about the intersection of creativity and brand. So before we get into the content, it's a small group here, and I think with small groups we can all be friends.
Yeah.
So let's learn a little bit more about you. So as you mentioned, you have over 90 brands, which is like basically having 90 children. And as much as parents don't want to admit that they have a favorite child, we all have a favorite child. So tell me your favorite brand after a long day of work, what Conagra brand are you going to enjoy, and then what Molson Coors beverage are you going to wash it back with?
Okay, so my favorite brand probably is Ready Whip. I don't know if I pop it open right after a long day of work.
Why not?
It's my favorite brand. And then my favorite beer to wash it down with is definitely Miller Lite because my husband is a die-hard loyalist.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. Well, so like if it's in your if he's buying it for the fridge, that's what you're drinking.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I like that. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. No, I know for me, I grew up in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is where Orville Redenbacher Popcorn was founded. So huge fan. Shout out to Valpo. So it would be a big bag of buttery popcorn, and then prior to 5 months ago, before I got pregnant, it would be a stubby bottle of banquet beer. But now, shout out to, I don't know if Lee is here, but shout out to the Blue Moon team for the new non-alcoholic version. Shout out to for pregnant women everywhere. So I'm here for that. Awesome. So just getting to know you, hearing your history, getting to know your background, you have an extensive passion and just a background in creativity and creating brands. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what is it exactly does that intersection of brand and creativity mean to you?
Okay, so first we should start by defining what creativity is, because it can mean a lot of different things, right? So in this context, we all know what brands are, we're well-versed in brands, but what creativity is really coming up with those novel and valuable ideas. Mm-hmm. And they can't be common, they have to be uncommon, and they have to be special to stand out. Mm-hmm. So the intersection of brand design, or brand and creative, is really the intersection of your brand strategy and the innovative part of creativity. Mm-hmm. And why that's important is your brand's whole growth and future depends on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been doing this for just a few years, So I'm sure there's been a lot of lessons learned, right? Like the good, the bad, the ugly. I shouldn't say the bad. It's a lesson. You learn.
We've all had them.
So tell me about kind of a few key elements when it comes to doing a really great job of meeting at the intersection of brand and creativity.
Yeah, so a lot of these same themes are going to be built on what we've already heard this morning. And to me, the most important thing is to know your brand, right? So do the deep homework and the research of finding out what it is in your brand that you can build on as that like ignition point for creative. And that could be your founder's story, that could be an attribute about your brand, it could be something that's in the marketing history, it could be a lot of things, but the most important thing is it has to be authentic, it has to be true. You can't just make up a new history for your brand because you have some great idea.
Yeah. And so there's that part, but then what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen?
Okay, so I have a great story, and some of my old coworkers are sitting here and they can acknowledge this. So we currently have a process. I'll talk a little bit about our process to get to that nugget. And what we did was go back and make a creative brief before we do a project. And for our marketers or brand people, what we got to is asking them 12 strategic questions. So instead of having something that you copy and paste, but you don't really get the critical thinking, this is like, just answer me these 12 questions, and I don't care if it's a Word doc, I don't care if it's a PowerPoint. Think of it like a college white paper. I I really want to get to that nugget of truth that we can build off of.
Yeah, and who are you sending this document out to? Like, who are you asking these questions to?
This is to the brand people that are kicking off the project, and then it goes to the agencies afterwards. But the idea is that once you have that completed, you meet with our senior leadership, and you go through it, and it's a culture where you're not handing something and it gets rubber stamped approved or not approved. You're really going to sit down and hash it out in discussion, because the idea is to push each other to get to a better place. And it's a collaboration, not a judgment. So it's a really great environment. But to your original question, like what was my biggest mistake?
Yeah.
So right before we did this process at Conagra, somebody had gone to Europe and found this super sexy black plastic bottle. And we were all like, as a designer, you're like, oh my God, that's so cool. It's gonna win all these awards. We have to figure out where we can use it.
And if it's in Europe, of course it's cooler than anything we have here.
So we thought, let's redo Golden's mustard and put it in this black bottle. Which, you know, even as we were designing it, we're like, it's so cool. There's other stuff in plastic. It doesn't really matter. You can see people laughing. It's a little too close to home. Everyone was super excited about it, and it came out and sales dove. Like, we probably left it on the market for 2 months, and then we had to go do like return. It was like Command Z, right? So, and the reason was, and this is another really core important thing, is you gotta remember the ideal experience about your product. And you can't just like make up something because it's cool and designy. You have to like know that people want to see their mustard.
They need to find it on the shelf.
And they couldn't find their brand on the shelf anymore. It looked too different. They couldn't see the product, and so lesson learned.
And I'm sure kind of an expensive lesson learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
So thinking outside of the Conagra portfolio, are there any brands you've seen that have really done a great job of finding that perfect balance of creativity and brand?
So when we found out we were doing this and we were here, I thought, how perfect, because last time I was here a year ago, it wasn't in this room, it was in a different room, and I forget who was talking, it was somebody from Miller, and they were talking about the Miller Lite, and they were talking about that everybody else was doing these like vodka type White Claw products, right? And they were like, that's not us, that is just superficial, that's not what this beer ever stood for. We are like kind of that, dive bar beer, and I mean that in the best sense. And so that's when they were explaining all the things with like the beer ornaments and the beer, this was before the beer stand that came out this year. But my favorite at the time was they made a gingerbread house, and it was kind of like a dive bar gingerbread house with sticky syrup on the floor, because you know all the best bars have sticky floors. I worked in a bar, I know this.
In Northern Illinois?
To me, that's like, yes. So to me, it was like, it was like the essence of what we're talking about, right? You gotta be true to your brand and find out that nugget of truth. And then once you have that brand truth, you can get really creative and capture the attention. And I tried really hard to get one of those gingerbread houses or to be an ornament. I couldn't.
Any left in storage? I mean, you have a good audience for it, no? Yeah. No. No, that's so interesting. I think I kind of want to double down on this brand truth, because I think everyone in this room, and at least every meeting I've been a part of, every brief I read, it's how do we drive relevancy with X, Y, and Z audience? And I know you, like I have a nephew who's 18, you have 2 sons right around that age, and my nephew, like sometimes he talks and I'm like, what are you trying to say to me right now? Like it's a different language, it's a different thing. So when it comes to a brand truth and ensuring that we're driving relevancy, aging down our brands, how does that work for Conagra? Like how are you kind of finding that balance of ensuring everything is staying relevant but also holding true to your brand truth?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, let me think. It all comes down to culture, right? So on one hand, you have to know your brand truth, but brands have to evolve. So if you think of like, even the iPhone, every brand has to evolve and stay up to date with the culture. So even the iPhone, right? If the iPhone stopped innovating with the first model, you wouldn't be buying the iPhone anymore, you would move on to the coolest thing. So you can't just be stuck frozen in time, you always have to be up to date. And I'll give you a couple examples of where like knowing who you are, but how you fit in with culture is really important. So when we acquired Pinnacle Foods, and we got about 45 brands with that one. And one of them that came over was Duncan Hines. I had a long history with working with Betty Crocker and General Mills because I was always on the agency side before I came to Conagra. And that category killed me because it was all like these red and beige boxes with these like laser cut triangle cakes, and every cake was exactly the same place, and it was so uncreative. And like it was like a complete disconnect from what was happening in the baking aisle in stores to what was happening in, like, if you go out to bakeries around the city, or what people were baking and posting online and social media, just a complete disconnect. So we were like, we gotta be relevant. So we ditched all those old rules. We went with like multicolored boxes, we got brand blocking. We made every single cake look different on the front. We really leaned into different people online making things for us and being super creative. And then we doubled down on that by coming out with innovations that were called Epic, that were like these over-the-top, like super indulgent things like you would find at bakeries around the city or anywhere else, or what we were seeing people do. So that's one way of staying present in culture.
Well, and also just, sorry not to cut you off, but I also think about that brand and then the innovation and the building of relevancy with Dolly Parton.
Oh yeah.
And as someone who lives in Tennessee, I mean, she's queen, like that's Queen Bee, so when she calls, I'm sure you guys answered.
Yes, and that was true. She actually reached out to us.
Which, like,
she was
it's
really
a dream.
Duncan Hines fan. So that was another way to make that brand relevant, even today, is by like who you partner with and what kind of things you do and create. Another one, and this will be like, I'll give you two more quick examples. Another one was, we had a kids brand called Kid Cuisine, and again, unsexy brand, right?
Grew up on those.
Right? But
Shout out to babies in the 90s.
It was stuck in the 70s, I would say, not even the 90s. It was still like the same character from the 70s, the same tray with the same food, and it was like still with the games on the box that you play like you used to do when you were a little kid. And so it was so out of touch with what today, but the whole thing was about like a fun dinner time experience. So if I gave you guys that challenge of like, how would you reinvent a brand for kids to be a fun dinner time experience, that is just a fantastic launch board for creativity, but still true to the brand. Yeah. So we came up with like QR codes with games, because people don't play on the box anymore. We came up with themes like dino and changed the food to be chocolate covered pretzels you dip in chocolate sauce, and they were called dinosaur bones. Like, so you can see where all this different stuff just is true, but grows your brand. And it is about increasing sales at the end of the day. That's what we're all here for. And that brand grew 35%. So that was pretty remarkable. And no advertising, no marketing, strictly the box had to do all the work. So, and then I wanted to touch upon one other example of creativity and brand, and this one is outside of design and outside of marketing. It's more in sales. So we have this brand, Angie's Boom Chick Pop. Love this brand. It's a woman-founded, women-started brand, great founder story. She had the same problem that a lot of startups had. She couldn't afford a booth at Expo West. So she couldn't even afford a booth on the sidewalk of Expo West. So what she did was she bought a bunch of pastel-colored Vespas with sidecars, and she put her own team in the Vespas, dressed them up in coveralls, pastels, stuck a sticker on the helmet, and they drove around Expo West with product for 3 days, just tossing it out to people. And it was just a great creative solve to a problem.
It reminds me of what Sophia had said earlier about with the Patrick Mahomes example, where it's like you have these limitations, how do you overcome it? So
yeah, creativity is about solving problems.
Awesome. So with Conagra, 90 brands, I can't say that enough because I'm like, how do you manage 90 brands in your mind? But there are a lot of brands that kind of fall within the same category, like Slim Jim and Duke's, which when I told my husband that I was going to be on a panel with you, he's like, just let her know I love Macho Man. I'm like, I will. Like, I'll, and I know that you finished out the partnership with WWE, so lots of fun stuff happening there. But back on topic. So when it comes to differentiation, like, how do you kind of go about staying in your brand truth and using creativity to kind of differentiate them?
Yeah, so it's fascinating because we do have brands right on top of each other. So a couple examples again, because I think examples always give you good illustration, and I wish I had graphics. We had sunflower seeds. Snacks are always big for this. We had sunflower seeds, a brand called David, and then we acquired a brand called Biggs. When you looked at them when we bought them, they were pretty identical packaging. You couldn't really tell the difference between it. So then we did that hard work I was talking about digging into the past. What does this brand stand for? What is it about? And what we discovered was Biggs was all about bigger seeds, bigger flavors, partnerships, doing things with flavors, and we could turn that into big attitude as well. So we changed the packaging to be very big and bold. We started doing promotions. I remember the guy talking about like, hey, what if we have a thing where you can have a bodybuilder pick you up and carry you across the street versus walking, because you would choose to live big. You know, so you could do all those zany things with that. And then on the flip side, David is this 100-year-old brand. It was like grounded in Americana. It was from a farmer. Like, it had all these great attributes too. So then we leaned into that and made it look like very Americana with red, white, and blue. We changed the logo to be proud and tall. We leaned into baseball versus Biggs, which we leaned into X Games. Yeah. Right? So we started doing promotion with baseball and Little League youth and all these really great things.
Well, it sends a lot of like personality. Like you identify the brand personality, then pull it out. So can you tell everybody a little bit more about like driving brand personality through creativity?
Yeah. So it is so key. And again, going back to, you're in this for the service of the brand. You got to stick to the brand personality. You can't do this to win awards and be funny or come up with your own personality. And especially now in this age of like quick reaction, you have to be true and know your brand so well that you can react within minutes when something happens in a way that's true to your brand. So an example I like to use is 2 Thanksgivings ago, we had this woman named Sharon Weiss burn a Marie Callender pie. And
I mean, who else can relate? Oopsie.
So this poor woman, Sharon Weiss, burns this pie and she posts on Facebook, thanks Marie Callender's for ruining my Thanksgiving. And I would have guessed maybe we have 5 followers on Facebook on Marie Callender. Like, I don't know, but this thing spread like wildfire. There was like these groups of thousands of people that created these like social media groups and were posting all this stuff. And our CEO was getting like nudges from other CEOs in the industry going, oh, dude, you gotta jump on this and roast her. You're missing an opportunity. And we were like, Marie Callender's would never be mean. Like, that is not the way you would handle that. So instead, we like reached out to her. We kind of felt bad for her. I mean, her
Had some empathy.
Get off of social media, and it was bad. And it turns out like we forged this really great relationship with her, and we turned like this thing was so weird. I went on Etsy and people had made a whole industry off of making ornaments with burnt pies and like they were knitting stuff and selling socks. It was like a whole subculture.
Should have trademarked it while you could.
Right? Like, but instead we were like kind to her like Marie would have been, and we ended up doing spots with her, and she was such a good sport, and she was like, just remember to cook your pie on Fahrenheit and not Sharonheit. So she had actually it was fun. She had actually like accidentally changed her setting to Celsius. So she cooked her pie on like what would be 707 degrees.
I didn't think ovens could go that hot, but I guess they can.
Yeah, right?
Oh my gosh, poor girl. Well, I appreciate you for having the empathy, because I also am notorious for burning everything I try to cook. So I appreciate that. So obviously I know you have a very extensive team, a lot of people, a lot of kind of cooks in the kitchen, but in a really great way, at least from what you and I talked about. There's this really great checks and balances across the board. So I'm sure like every day you're kind of inspiring one another, but I'd love to learn like what have you seen recently out there that's inspired you and your team?
I love to look at other industries, right? I don't like to stick in my industry. I like to look globally at what's going on. But I gotta say, one thing I'm sort of fascinated with lately is Mattel. And I wrote his name down. I don't know if I'm gonna say this right. This new CEO, Jan Kreitz, is that his name? Does anyone know? Anybody work with Mattel? This guy came in and changed it from being about selling toys. And I have a feeling like after the Barbie movie, he's got, I heard 14 more movies in the works, like Vin Diesel is going to be in Rock'em Sock'em Robots. There's a Matchbox movie with J.J. Abrams. He's got a theme park he's building somewhere in the U.S. I have a feeling if we keep watching this, it's going to be like the new Disney in about 10 years.
Yeah.
So it just to show you, like, find out what your brand's about and really how crazy could you take it versus being so limited to thinking about just toys.
Totally. I know. I still have you. Did you go see the Barbie movie?
I haven't yet.
I haven't either. Oh, we should go after that. Let's ditch them.
Yeah.
Sorry over the panels. We're ditching and going. No, thanks so much for sharing that. And then obviously across all of your different brands, there's probably a lot you're kind of cooking on, no pun intended. But what's happening within Conagra right now that in the next like 6 months, 12 months, 18 that you and your team are really excited about? And if you two want to come up and grab a mic, feel free.
The things I'm most excited about, and one of them is across all the brands. So it's more like how are you staying relevant? We're really getting into interactive packaging. So how do you use packaging to launch people into these other spaces and get more engagement with your brands through that, through QR codes and different experiences. Other things I'm really excited about is Dolly Parton. We're expanding that whole relationship and there's a whole bunch of new stuff coming out in the near future. And then the third thing is Slim Jim. So Slim Jim, it's just such an awesome brand and it has this history with wrestling and stuff. And you guys can all relate to this. We were really at a product shortage. We were having big problems. And then we built a new plant to get more product and we had trouble hiring people, like we just couldn't get people to produce it. So now we've overcome all that, so I'm like, whoa, we're back. And we can get all, because you couldn't make creative if you had no product to sell. Yeah. So now we're back and we just have a new partnership with WWE, so building on Randy Savage, how do you take that forward? And we're doing some really cool, we just did SummerSlam last summer, we got some great stuff coming out and great product innovation. So I think there's gonna be big fun things happening with that brand.
Awesome. Well, I want to take you back actually to the first point you made about packaging and driving people to different locations. Like, can you tease out anything you're working on there with where you're driving people?
It all comes down to how you sell more product and what is meaningful for your brand, right? So if you think of a brand like Plastic Pickles, you might want to go to Pinterest because that's where people go for all these like great ideas. Others might be entertaining. Some might be going to recipe sites. So it really is just like getting creative with your brand.
Yeah, awesome. Well, great. No, that's all really great. So thanks for sharing. So just one final takeaway. Like obviously you have an incredibly talented team at your fingertips internally, but you have an entire room here filled with partners and marketers. Is there one thing you guys are talking about right now internally that like is just this huge issue you really wish someone could help you fix? Or help you with, not fix, but help you with?
I am really curious right now about, like, we're all talking AI, right? And how do I use AI to make work more efficient, right? So it's not about taking people's jobs or being creative, but maybe like things like we're doing adaptations or cutting things and making them for multiple uses. How do you use AI to do these kind of things? How do you use AI to do some of the auditing we need to do? Like right before this, we were talking about all the insights that you have to get. Is there an easier way to do that?
Yeah.
Less manual.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And any questions? We have some time if there's any questions or anything else you want to add.
The one thing I will close out with, if I like have one thing as a takeaway, is like we talk about storytelling all the time. And if you think about this as you're writing your brand's next chapter in their story, your brand character is the same, right? You might evolve over time, but your inside is the same. Yeah. But you have to make the story so interesting with some twists and turns to the plot that you keep the reader engaged.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lori.
Thanks.